Welcome back to Coates in Conversation. I'm your host, Kendrick Coates, a licensed therapist who works with couples and athletes in the state of Illinois and Alabama. In today's conversation, I'll be speaking with Jaden Johnson, who is an Illinois State University graduate, former track and field athlete, and impact movement campus coach for college students, and is a future sports psychologist. In our conversation, we'll be discussing athlete injuries and their impact on mental health and performance, identity as an athlete, and the struggles with mental health providers who don't understand the culture. If you're a coach, sports parent, or athlete, this episode is for you. Jaden, so you were a former athlete. If you could describe the version of yourself you were at the height of your athletic career in one word, what would it be and why?
Oh, that's a great question. First, thank you for having me here, Kendrick, and giving me this platform to speak on some things. If I had to describe it in one word, I would say liberated. I would say liberated because at the height of my athletic career, I felt like there were no limitations. I just was running because I enjoyed doing it, and it was fun. I was freeing. I felt like I was just at the peak of my career. So I would definitely say liberated.
Being liberated and being free is one of the best feelings, obviously.
hmm
Gives you this sense of sometimes purpose, gives you a sense of being. During that time when you say you felt liberated, mentally, do you feel like you had it all together as a college student athlete?
Absolutely not.
Mm.
Absolutely not. I wouldn't say that I ever really had it all together, but during this time that I'm describing, I definitely had most of it together. Um, I would say the height of my athletic career was my very last competition. I was getting ready to wrap up being a student athlete, and I was just accepting the fact that this chapter of my life was closing. I still had so much yet to figure out because I was going to be going into the rest of the world, the real world after college, and um, I was adjusting, but I felt like I had a good grasp on my sport at that time.
Mm. I'm glad you mentioned that, and we'll definitely get more into that. I think as athletes, there's sometimes this sense of things have to happen immediately. So whether it be
Mm.
success, whether it be trying to figure out life after sports, but I want to shift gears before we jump into that topic. And can you take us back to the moment when you realized your mental health was being impacted by your sport and what the experience was like for you?
Yeah. One of the first times that I can recall mental health being impacted by my sport is when I got on campus. When I first came in as a freshman, because I had just left high school from being one of the top or the top hurdler in the state of Illinois. So I kind of was used to um, just being one of the best in my sport. So when I got to college and stepped foot on campus into this competitive area, I realized that I was not the best anymore. I wasn't the top dog like I had felt coming into it. And that really took a toll on me because I began comparing myself to others and just looking at what others were doing in their sport and comparing it to how I still had so much room to grow. Um, I recall not really being paid attention to for a while. And again, that's such a contrast from what I was used to because I was used to having the spotlight on me in high school. Um, so my freshman year in college, I felt ignored. I felt like people didn't really know my name. I'm on this big track team, Division 1 team, and I just felt very ignored and alone. And that's when I started to notice that there was a shift in how my sport was affecting my mental health. I mean, I recall people not really talking to me much until I started to do good in the sport. So it
Mhm.
was almost like my value in that environment came from how well of a competitor I was and not from who I was as a person. So early on, it was like separating my identity.
Which, when you start thinking about those things, like you said, going into an environment where you're not paid attention to is just even that, like, how does that impact masculinity? Because
Hmm.
I know you've talked about it on your social media platform. It's something that you have interest in. How does you going into this sports space where you were top dog in high school, you come into this sports space being ignored, how did that impact?
Well, I think regardless of manhood or masculinity, people just want to feel like they belong. They just want to feel like they're important and loved and cared for. But a lot of men don't express that need that we have for that. Like a lot of times I felt like I was trying to cover it up, or cover up the fact that I had a desire to belong on a team that I felt like I didn't belong on. And I definitely faced a lot of challenges mentally. I mean, I was learning how to balance my schedule for the first time being in that business of the NCAA while being a student. And I just felt like there wasn't much of an opportunity for me to share the struggles that I was going through because of the way that mental health is stigmatized against men. And it's kind of just like, okay, you're gonna go do your sport and that's all there is to it. Like no tears if you fail, no complaining if you're going through a rough patch. And I just felt like I was observing those stigmatizations very early on. Yeah, and I just think that eventually I started to learn that it was okay to be a man in a competitive sport that's typically making us have this feeling to just be hard and tough. I learned early on that it was okay to let your guard down a little bit. It's okay to cry if you don't meet your goals because that hurts and that means that you care. So my sport was teaching me really early on how to combat these struggles that men typically face
Mm.
with mental health.
There's I'm even thinking about just from a societal standpoint, how many of us are conditioned. So it's like either you produce
Hmm.
something or you are nothing.
Hmm.
And when you talk about, it's okay to share tears, it's okay to open up. So many of us, especially us men of color, that
Hmm.
is a dang near a foreign language.
Yeah.
Thinking about like, what do I even have the language to talk about? I feel sad. Do I have the language to
Hmm.
talk about I feel depressed? Do I have the language to
Hmm.
talk about I feel anxious? The one thing that I do find, and maybe you can speak on this a little bit, is the language that many of us male athletes and us male athletes of color, the language we do have is anger, and that's almost acceptable. Can you speak a little bit
Mm.
on that?
Oh, absolutely, I can. I think that you hit the nail right on the head. Um, the language that we have is anger. Like, if we encounter hardships, our emotion might not even be anger. Like, we might not even necessarily be angry. We might be sad about something, or we might be surprised with with the result that we got. But a lot of times, the only emotion that we've been taught to express is anger as men of color. I mean, I'm just thinking about like as a young age how like even kids games with like boys are taught about competitive fight and a lot of girls games are like collaboration and deep
Hmm.
thinking. So some of those things kind of translate into it as we get older. And I just think, well, I worked with kids before in mental health, and I was teaching kids a lot how to find the words for their emotions. So, like, here's what you're feeling. But what I soon realized is that adults often don't even have the emotions, the words for the emotions that they feel.
Hmm.
So, um, in a competitive environment such as Division 1 athletics, we're just kind of told to push through, muster through, and that's it. So that just kind of really reinforced the anger that we have a lot of times. Um, I feel like I would mess up in my sport sometimes and not know how to express it, not know how to talk through what I was feeling. But a lot of times the the predominant emotion I felt was just anger. Whether it was disappointment really because I didn't do what I wanted to, or sadness because I'm going to be leaving my sport. A lot of times it was just expressed as oh, or a grunt or
Hmm.
oh, just like not knowing how to fully express what I was feeling. So I think you hit the nail right on the head with anger being one of the main emotions that we have the language for.
Hmm. So thinking about anger and transitioning, you high school standout athlete, you get on the college scene,
Mm,
feeling ignored, not feeling welcomed,
mhm.
in some cases, and then you have this major incident that happens. So you had a major incident that happened, and injuries are often talked about in physical terms. But what was the emotional and or mental toll from your injury?
Yeah, I think injuries can never get talked about enough because there's so many different ways that it affects the athlete. I mean, it's easy to only get caught up in the physical aspect of it because that's what we see. But I think that at least for me personally, it was much harder in the long run on my mentality because I set unrealistic expectations for myself. So I broke my collarbone my junior year of college, right as I was starting to pick up momentum and really get acclimated into my sport. I broke my collarbone. I fell over a hurdle. And although I was recovering physically, I recovered pretty well. Mentally, I was afraid to hurdle again, or I had now set unrealistic expectations for myself. I had hoped to return right where I left off after hitting my injury, without considering the fact that that progress isn't linear. It's not just a straightforward path. A lot of times there's a little loop where you might even take a few steps back before learning how to keep moving forward. So I remember showing up in my sling. I had a sling because my collarbone was broken. I showed up in my sling to practice. And I'm just watching my teammates practice with this sling on, like, oh, I remember doing that. I can't wait till
Hmm.
I can do that again. And it's just like those things added up. So like one day I would do it and then I'd go back the next day and it just started to stack up. And I'm like, wow, am I ever gonna get back to how I want to be? Am I ever gonna be this athlete that I had hoped for? And yeah, I would even say I started to become a little hopeless in that. Like, I don't know if I'll ever get back. I was building so much momentum and now it's just gone. I don't know if I can ever get back to that again. So I think I was even afraid to even just allow myself to be liberated, like I said earlier, and just practice freely after I recovered. I was so afraid to take the wrong step at a hurdle and recreate what had caused this huge issue in my life. So, yeah, there's definitely a ginormous mental toll that injuries can take on the athlete.
I don't think it is talked about enough. You made a point there. I don't think it's talked about enough. Many of us athletes, and I was a former athlete who went through an ACL injury,
Hmm.
and went through my training, and I was like, all right, I'm getting back on the football field, and I'm be good. But nobody really talks about you literally have to go back to square one,
Yeah.
and because there's such a mental component to it. I mean, even to this day, and I'm far removed from high school and college sports, but even to this day,
Hmm.
there are times when I'll be playing some sort of game and kind of cautious because I'm like, I don't want somebody to hit my leg again.
Hmm.
So to this day, you posted something recently. You're running on the track. Do you still have this sense of fear when it comes to stepping foot on the track?
I would say I do have a sense of fear when it comes to stepping foot on the track, but not because of recreating an injury. Now it's a little bit different. My fear now that I'm done with track is that I'll never be as in shape as I was again, or that I'll
Mm,
never be that kind of an athlete to that level anymore because I feel like I might have peaked a little bit. I mean, I built so much momentum leading into my retirement that now when I get back to it, it's like I don't have the same training that I used to have. I don't have the same resources that I have. So sometimes it's a little discouraging because it's like, okay, what am I doing this for? I'm not gonna go run a competition. I'm just doing this to do it. But I've learned that that's enough. I love it, so I want to keep doing it. And but yes, I do sometimes still have a fear of not getting back to what I used to be because I
mm,
know what that felt like.
mhm. So you went through the injury. That was a big event that happened in your college career, and then you
Hmm.
had another incident that happened, but this was to a friend. I don't know how much in depth you want to talk about that situation, but can you
Hmm.
speak on as much as you're comfortable speaking on how that situation impacted you just as an athlete, as a student,
Mhm.
thirdly as a human being.
Absolutely. I mean, when I came into school my freshman year, it was my first time going to college. I mean, I was actually a first generation college student, so uh, I didn't really have anybody to pave the way before me and show me the ins and outs of what college life is like. I was the first in my family to go to a 4-year university. Um, and leaving my family, I remember actually being really afraid of my sister forgetting who I was because she was 2 at the time.
Mm,
And I was like, oh man, she's gonna forget all about me and I'm gonna come back and be this stranger. So I just had all of these different things going through my mind about leaving my family, starting this business of the NCAA, being a student, and juggling all of that for the first time without guidance in college. So, fortunately, I found a friend on the team. His name was Austin Rao, and he was a high jumper. He transferred into Illinois State's track and field team. Um, and we clicked. We clicked. I mean, it was nice because he was a year older than me. So he kind of got to show me the ropes a little bit that I was needing. And he really was just walking alongside me as I was going through college. And this was great. I mean, we hung out a lot. We were able to connect on different topics, and we opened up a little bit about mental health to one another, which wasn't common, especially amongst men. But we did. And the sliver that he gave me, it wasn't enough for me to really understand what he was going through in his own life. Because on the outside, he had a great persona. He was smiling, helping others. He was always joyful. But on the inside, he was struggling a lot with his own challenges, his own battles with mental health and depression. He really, really wrestled with. So eventually, about a year and a half after our friendship had started, he he completed suicide,
mm,
and yeah, he just couldn't bear with the challenges and struggles that he was dealing with.
mhm.
And again, he was like my home away from home. So like he was like my brother here at school showing me the ropes. So now going back into school without this and just dealing with all the confusion that came from it. Like, why did this happen? Why was I not a good enough friend? Blaming myself and just the grieving process that began. It really was difficult being a student athlete because although those things happened to me or I experienced that, my life as a student and my life as an athlete were still on the go. I had no time to stop those things because it's a business. There's a timeline to these things, which I was aware of, but I just feel like I didn't get much time to really understand what had happened before I had to tend to my obligations again. And going back into track, going back into school after Austin's death was devastating. I mean, this was actually the second friend that I had lost in this way. The first one being a friend in my junior year of high school. But this was devastating because now there are still expectations. I was now an upperclassman in college, so I was going to be graduating soon. I now had to lead the new incoming freshmen coming in, and all of that while still learning to take care of myself. My self care was poor. If I'm being transparent, like it was hard to shower consistently. It was hard to eat meals at the right rate that I needed to fuel myself for my sport. And, it just really had a domino effect on I, the way that I acted in my sport. And eventually I was able to get help for it, but it was devastating to say the least.
Man, I just want to say that I appreciate you for being vulnerable, sharing that. You know, I'm not usually at a loss for words, but when you have gone through it 2 times, one in high school and then the second time in college, and you are, close to somebody who is kind of that brother, mentor like figure
Hmm.
for you. Um, man, I'm just thankful that, you know, you're able to speak about this, just your experiences, because I think in that we've seen so many other stories out there where student athletes have gone through this. And I've always wondered, okay, what happens to those student athletes who were close to the athlete who,
Hmm.
went through and completed? So number one, I just want to thank you for being vulnerable. Secondly, I want to just say how from in my experiences, it's not common for men to have this type of space to speak
Mhm.
on something like this. You hit on a good point where it was just like you had no time to grieve. Really, it was just
Mhm.
on to the next thing. Did you feel like you had the proper amount of support as a student athlete to truly grieve the loss of your friend? So that could look in the form of, not missing practices, maybe
Mhm.
sitting out some competitions. Did you feel like you had that opportunity?
To be honest, I don't. Um, I don't. I mean, I think that my team was very gracious to me because they knew that I was struggling. People reached out to me and were giving me their condolences, but I don't think that I don't think that I had enough time to grieve and enough support in the way that I needed it to be. I mean, because realistically, there were expectations to be met. I mean, the NCAA is a business, so what we do as athletes directly reflect um, our coaches, our facilities, our budgets. Like what we do, how we perform can directly impact that. And I understood that. Well, I understand it now that I was a puzzle in that piece, but I was a piece to that puzzle. Sorry, but no, I don't feel like I had proper support. I mean, I ended up stumbling upon a sports psychologist at our school, which was very helpful, but I wasn't recommended to the sports psychologist. Like, I feel like I had to do a lot more digging than I had energy for. And sometimes I do wish that there was a little bit more of a nudge to push me into those resources than me discovering them on my own. And I think that's just a disconnect in a lot of different places. Like there are resources available, but not everybody knows how to obtain those resources or what to do once they get to the resources. So I think just in general, sometimes we need to do a better job of leading people to the resources and helping them once they get there as well.
You make a valuable point of, the resources are there, but again, we go back to so many of us are trying to uphold this identity, this masculinity. We're trying to
Hmm.
uphold this expectation of how we want people to view us. And so
Hmm.
if and I'm not saying, not a blanket statement that this happens for everybody, but for those athletes that sometimes need it, it's, well, is there somebody going to judge me? Is this
Hmm.
information that I'm going to share with this psychologist or therapist, are they going to tell my coach, and then is my coach then going to take me out of X, Y, and Z? So there's so
Hmm.
many different nuances and to this, when it comes to seeking out mental health support. As we're, on this topic, when you decided to seek support for your mental health, did you encounter challenges finding a therapist who reflected, understood, or could relate to your background, especially in a field where representation is lacking?
Absolutely. Absolutely. I didn't find a therapist that had a similar appearance to me, which I feel like is important because initially, like without saying any words, we already come up with these ideas about people just by looking at them. And I found a therapist that looked nothing like me, but was still trying to speak to me about the unique issues and struggles that I faced as a Black man. And it was a good effort. Like they did what they could. However, it's tricky if there's a different way to connect to others than just with spoken word. Like you just being like we're both Black men. Like we can connect on a different level just by looking at each other without saying one word. And I definitely found that tricky. I think another thing is that a lot of sports psychologists never played a sport, which is also another
Mm,
thing because going through that the the movements, going through the motions of being an athlete, I feel like that stirs up different mindsets, different thinking habits that you can't get unless you're already an athlete or have been an athlete. So I definitely struggle to find someone to support me to meet the needs in that way. But nonetheless, I think it was still good to just have somebody to talk to that was a professional that knew the gist of what I needed to get off of my chest. And it was still very helpful. So I didn't find exactly what I needed in a sports psychologist, but I found an organization on campus called the Impact Movement that actually had an abundance of Black college students. And it
Mhm.
was a faith-based organization. So pairing that with the sports psychologist in the sessions, that was that was my synergy. Like that really helped me to get back on my feet because I think I was really missing that ethnic identity part that was really a connecting piece to who I am too.
There's, one of the things that I talk about in the work that I do, especially as being a therapist, is there are a lot of people who want to do the work, but it's hard because there's no community. And
Hmm.
so for you to be able to find the impact movement
Hmm.
organization to where there was representation and there was a sense of understanding amongst you all,
Hmm.
did that aid in your healing journey?
Absolutely. Absolutely. It wasn't even something that I understood I needed until I got into that space and I was like, wow, like something was missing.
Mm,
Again, I didn't know it until I got there, until I was around other people that looked like me, that had similar upbringings, and it was faith-based. I mean, my faith is a big part of my life. It's a part of how I operate on a day-to-day basis. So being able to be in an environment like that, it definitely was a big factor in me getting back on my feet.
you going through that journey
Mhm.
of not initially having somebody who related to you on a cultural identity, ethnicity standpoint, your view of mental health before that situation to now, how has it changed?
Mm. It's changed immensely. I mean, I now understand that mental health is it's a whole thing. It's not just physical, it's not just mental. It's an entire thing. There's so many different parts of our lives that impact the way we feel. And now that I am on the other side of what I went through, I can look back and see, okay, this is when I needed uh to have a male friend close to me, or this is when being around the Black community really helped me. But before those moments, I didn't realize that I needed any of those things until I got into it. And it almost makes me think, okay, what am I missing now that I don't know I need?
Yeah, right.
but but as of right now, it's just like representation really matters. Having people that connect to you on a deeper level than your sport matters, because a lot of our worth as athletes comes from our sport and what we can contribute to others, or how good we are. I mean, a lot of it is status too. So I mentioned earlier how many people didn't really speak to me until I started to do well. Um, but I'm realizing there's so much more to life. There's so much more to who I am than what my sport revealed to me. Like I thought, okay, if I if I make this time, then maybe these people that are also really good at their event will start talking to me. Or if I fall over this hurdle, maybe I'll lose my scholarship, or maybe somebody else will come in. So like I realized I was focusing a lot on my sport. Um, but now I get to look at it as who I am as a whole person. Who is Jaden Johnson outside of just the athlete? Like
Mhm.
I love music. I love videography. I do a lot of other things too than just my sport. So
Mm.
mm,
I'm glad that you mentioned that because I just mentioned this maybe about a week ago on a post, and
mm,
I specifically was talking about the reality of being an athlete, and once we actually leave the sport.
mm,
And for me, so much of my worth and my identity was wrapped up into the things that I could produce for the teams that I was on.
mhm,
And it was all great. But then it was like all the people who were cheering for you, they supported. But then it was like when you left, it's like nobody's clapping.
mm,
And I think so many of us struggle with that. And it's like, that brings up, well, was I even really good enough? Did people even
mm.
really value me for who I was as a person?
Yep.
Am I even worthy enough to have supportive people around me? So
Mm,
these loops just continue, continue,
mhm,
continue. Which brings me to my next question. So many athletes struggle with this question.
Mm,
Who am I without my sport?
mm.
How did you navigate that identity shift when your athletic career came to an end?
Yeah, I think that's a question that a lot of athletes, like you said, find themselves asking themselves. And I think what I learned is I knew the importance for finding my identity outside of my sport before I left it. Like I started to learn about, okay, I'm going to go through a big life shift and I need to be prepared for it. So I started doing things that had nothing to do with my sport as I was coming to an end. I started to explore my hobbies. I started to find what I loved outside of track. I stopped talking about track as much when I wasn't in that environment because that was a big thing I would do. A lot of my friends were teammates, and when we were outside of practice, we would still find ourselves talking about practice or the upcoming drill or whatever. Um, so I was learning to remove myself from it before it happened. Getting involved in things like impact, like finding community outside of my sport was also a big deal. And yeah, I really just honestly, I think I'm still figuring it out.
And
I think
that's
I'm still
okay.
figuring, yeah, I'm still figuring it out, but I've definitely made progress. So like hobbies have really just become a big thing because with being in the sport, like it's so structured, like your days are planned out. You got this at this time, weights, practice, class, maybe another team meeting or something. And now all of that was just kind of out of the loop. I was out of the loop with those things. So I had to fill my time in other ways. So I would start going for walks or start reading books or just reaching out and volunteering, doing other things that allowed me to find a sense of purpose and belonging now that I was done with my sport.
What motivated or inspired that? Because that's not something you typically
Hmm.
hear from athletes. They're still competing and dabbling in, figuring out what their hobbies are,
Hmm.
special interests, etc. So what was the influence or motivator with all of that?
Yeah, honestly, so my biggest mental health scare was after my friend Austin passed away. And I realized that I did not want to go down the same road that he was in. And since that point, I had already begun developing ways to be my best because I know what it felt like to be left behind in that. And I realized that I just needed to find ways to take care of myself because it's not an easy task to be a student and an athlete and then prepare for the transition for both of those things to just be taken away from you. So I realized my need for that. I would say Austin was a big motivator, but also I'm just a competitive person. I think many athletes are. So I found myself competing with myself. Like, no, Jaden, you can do a certain amount of, you can read a certain amount of books by the end of the month, or you can do this. So I just found that my competitive drive never stopped. So it kind of just carried me through my transition.
Hmm. I, the thought that I the thought that came in my mind, I was like, you play golf? We might have to play some golf sometime.
I play sometimes, yeah.
In my mind, my thought just like latched onto that because when I heard competitive, because I'm pretty competitive too, and I was
Yeah.
just like, hey Jaden, we might have to play some golf
We might
sometime.
have to we might have to get together sometime.
Yeah.
I'm a lefty, so I swing the opposite way.
Yeah.
Yeah.
So we've talked about mental health, your experiences, losing a friend, identity, injuries. Looking back on your journey, what kind of support or conversations did you wish you had available to you earlier, whether from coaches, teammates, or mental health professionals?
That's a great question. I think that when I'm sitting down and talking about my story all at once, it really gives me a better way to look over it and kind of see where I could have filled in the gaps. But I think a big thing for me is I wish that there would have been more discussions on mental health. I tried my best. I mean, I was a psychology major, so I started initiatives for mental health. After my friend died, I put together a an all student athlete photo that we would take every year and kind of just stand in solidarity. So initiatives, I liked that I was a part of those. I hope that they still continue. Like they continued up until the point where I graduated, but I hope that they continue because the conversations don't need to stop. I feel like if anything, it's getting more cutthroat now. I mean, there are high schoolers and younger aged athletes that are just doing incredible marks and performances. So the demand and desire for these valuable athletes is going to only grow. And I think as that happens, we need to be mindful that we're still humans that have emotions and feelings. And I'm not saying it to like adopt this victim mindset of, oh no, I'm upset, or I'm not trying to adopt a victim mindset, but there are very real challenges that we face as student athletes. And I would also say just more educational tools for faculty, staff, donors, fans. Like fans are also a part of it. I'm thinking back to a time where I was at a football game and a fan was saying some really hurtful things to one of the football players, trying to get them off of their game, like some personal things about them.
Mm.
And I'm just like, I think everybody needs to be aware of the fact that you're talking to a person, not just someone that you can bet against or bet on, get you money, or not just someone that has a social status. Like this is a real person with family members, goals, aspirations. So I think more educational tools, and I like workshops a lot. Workshops are pretty cool. So things of that nature, I would have loved to see more of, which I think our school did a really good job of doing them. But I know that that's not the reality for all schools. So,
So there's a sports parent somewhere out there who is listening to this podcast. They've got a son or daughter who may be going through some of the similar things that you've gone through, whether it be injury or whether it be dealing with a friend who may be suffering from depression, anxiety, et cetera, et cetera.
mm,
What do you want that sports parent to take away from this episode?
well, I think it's great that you've got a child in sports because sports build character. And I don't regret one moment of being in the sport or the challenges that I had from them. But I definitely want you to take away something similar to what I was just saying with be gracious with your athlete. They might already be hard enough on themselves. If they don't perform well, they understand the weight of not doing well. If you think you do, they're the ones that are doing it. So they definitely understand the weight of not doing well. So tell them that you're proud of them. Tell them that they're trying their best. Just really affirm that what they're doing is where they're supposed to be right now. And if they make a mistake along the way, have some grace towards them. We all make mistakes, but I would definitely say don't hold back either, because in terms of expanding their growth and giving them resources to push further, like although you're being gracious with them, still give them opportunities to be challenged and really test their strength and their muscles to see how far they can go. Because you might have a pro athlete on your hands, who knows? But along the way, just be gracious with them and understand that they know what it's like to do bad. So talking down on them or undermining the small progress that they make, it's progress nonetheless. So just be gracious and encourage them when you can. Be supportive. It all comes down to that.
Jaden, I just want to take a second to give you your flowers. I
Mm,
know that this is something that a lot of us, going back to your point earlier in this conversation, a lot of us men don't get this. We don't
mhm,
get that recognition for our voice. We don't get this recognition for just us being human beings. I want to recognize you as a human being and the powerful voice that you have to speak to others and to be vulnerable enough to share your story. I know that there are probably thousands of other student athletes in America right now who have gone through the same thing that you've gone through, and for you to be able to stand in your purpose and
mm,
share these things that you've gone through is commendable. Secondly, I want to commend you for having that motivation and that drive for wanting to continue to better yourself, but more
mhm,
importantly, wanting to use your gifts to become a sports psychologist and helping
mm,
other athletes out there. I think there are, again, thousands of athletes who are yearning for somebody who looks like
mhm,
us, who understands us, but who can just hold space for us the way we need them to
mhm.
hold space for us. So I want to thank you for coming on to Coats in Conversation and sharing your story. And I want to thank you for continuing to be that light for many other people around you.
Thank you so much, Kendrick. I've really enjoyed my time here, and what you're doing by giving people the platform to speak on these topics is also changing the lives of many people. So Thank you for your work as well.
I appreciate you. Again, athlete mental health is something that's invisible. Most of us sometimes don't even see what somebody's internally battling. If you are a sports parent, ask your athlete, how are they really doing? It's not always about the stats. It's not always about the awesome track times. It's not always about the touchdowns. Sometimes it's just being there for somebody and really understanding them as a person. As Jaden highlighted in this episode, we don't always know what somebody's internally battling, but if we can just take 5 minutes, maybe even 2 minutes out of your day, just to really ask a student athlete, hey, are you really doing okay? Or, hey, is there something that I can do to better help support you? That would go a long way because there are so many athletes that fall under this pressure of these expectations that many sports programs place on them. And you're dealing with young minds who sometimes aren't mature enough to figure out what's right from left or what's wrong from right. So take that time to ask a student athlete, are you doing okay? And is there something I can do to better support? Be sure to like and subscribe to Coaching Conversation and leave a comment. What was the best part of this podcast episode? There were many nuggets and gems that Jaden laid on us. Be sure to let us know so we can continue having these conversations.